Hi everyone. I have a question for you guys, but before asking, I will provide you with some information that might or might not be helpful. My name is Bareen Sheikh. I have been living in Sweden for the past 14 years, and this is what I consider to be my home. Even though I wasn't born here, I was born in Pakistan. I speak both Urdu and Swedish fluently, and I am both a Pakistani and a Swedish national. So if you think that I am Swedish, please raise your hand. It's funny how everyone here raised their hands or did not raise their hands within seconds. And it's funny because unlike me, I don't know this after all these years. And I can also not know for sure why some here raised their hands and some did not. Maybe it's the fact that I grew up in Sweden that makes me Swedish, or maybe it's the fact that I don't look Swedish that doesn't make me Swedish. Because I am not white, nor am I tall and blue-eyed. I'm here to talk about how our identity is affected by the behaviors of others, and how do people perceive you, and why does the behavior change when you tell them something about yourself or when they notice something? Is it because of your sexual identity that you get to be stigmatized? Or maybe it's your ethnicity or religion? When I get home today, I am for sure gonna think about how everyone here raised their hands. Not because I actively want to, but because subconsciously my mind will also be affected by the behaviors of you guys. And now to the question about identity. Who am I? Every time someone talks about identity, this question always pops up. And ironically, it does not take into consideration who you actually are. Because our identity is made up of many different things, and one can say that it's almost infinite. If you think that you found the answer, well, there's probably something else that you did forget about. But the most important thing to remember is that identity is something that is fluid and it's always changing. So never be stuck on one answer, even though it might seem hard at times. And for me, that part has always been my cultural/ethnic background. That is what has caused me the most out or affected my identity the most. Because as I said before, Sweden is my home. But yet, not many will consider me Swedish ever. And if you ask someone who's Pakistani and lives there, I will never be considered one of them either because I am too Swedish for them. And just like millions of others who grew up in a mixed environment, I am stuck in a gray zone. And I'm also sure that many of you have heard of this concept before, how hard it is to sometimes fit in due to factors you have no control over. And I just need to point out that this subject is not limited to race, but it rather includes all other factors one is born with. And it doesn't have to be anything bad as well, because think of those who spoke on this stage today. Most of them have been females, and is that a coincidence? Probably yes, but deep down there is going to be a sociological reason behind it. And the same thing applies to when people judge you, or when they say things that clearly aren't okay to say. And in my case, it's always about my ethnicity or the way I look. Maybe I should just call them racist remarks or just racism because it is bad. This is the definition of racism, and it's pretty wordy, but I'm still gonna read it out. The definition of racism is prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism by an individual, community, or institution against a person or people on the basis of their membership of a particular racial or ethnic group, typically one that is a minority or marginalized. And it's a lot of things here that you have to keep in mind. But if I ask someone here if they have experienced this active discrimination, most will say no, and I would also say no. Because when racism occurs, no one tells you, I dislike you because you are brown. It is rather the hostility that is noticeable. It's when people don't talk to you because you're the only one different, or when they ask questions that seem a little bit too specific. So the key word in this definition is antagonism, but it's also the word that we seem to forget about the most in Sweden. And similarly, there's also a word that fits pretty well to this, and it's a Swedish word for smygrazism. There's no exact English translation, but it's made up of two words, the word sneaky and racism, and it refers to all comments, remarks, and behaviors that aren't directly racist, but have a racist undertone. And I have so many examples of this that if I had to write a book about it, I could. And it has been a part of my daily life since forever, really. An example of this would be when people ask me, how are women in Pakistan treated? And I answer, pretty well. But the other person would always start arguing about how they're not treated well, and then mention Malala and whatnot. Also keep in mind that I never meet someone who has actually been to Pakistan or met Pakistani people. So their knowledge is extremely limited to what the media portrays. And we all know that what the media portrays is not the whole picture, and it will never be. If you meet a Palestinian person, you will never start arguing with them how Israel is the better country. And if you're really concerned about a group of people you have never met, you should become an activist. But don't make me or other minorities in Sweden pay the price for your ignorance. Because I am not an advocate for all Pakistanis just because I'm brown, and I'm not an advocate for all Muslims just because I wear the hijab. It's the same way a gay person is not representing all of the LGBTQ plus community just because they're gay. And as a British person is not responsible for the country's past with colonization. And maybe the question did sound pretty normal about how are women in Pakistan treated. But if you genuinely want to know, I would be very happy to answer any questions you have about Pakistan. But if the answer is something that you do not expect and you get defensive about it, that's when I know that the issue does not lie within the country itself, but the person who is asking. Another example of this would be in 8th grade. I was going to travel to Pakistan with my family because of my brother's engagement. And I had to have a leave for 2 months because it's a very big Pakistani wedding, of course. And the school required me to talk to each and every one of teachers to decide a way that I would make up for the missed studies. But there was one teacher who was concerned about something very different. She asked me, or actually she told me that it was me who was going to get married and not my 27-year-old brother. And she didn't really understand the issue within this, so she continued asking me if I had the contact information of my friends in Sweden and if Wi-Fi existed in Pakistan. Yeah. Later that day, I told my classmates at the time about this incident, and she justified it by saying that she is just old. And in that situation, I was hopeless because what could I do when people justify this behavior all the time? But at the same time, it's also not her fault for saying this because racism in Sweden is very different from what we're taught about it. In school, all we learn about is the systematic prejudice against African Americans, or the racism Christian minorities had to face in the Middle East hundreds of years ago. And Sweden is not racist in the same sense. We never highlight our cruel past of racism towards minorities, such as the Sami people, but we rather try to suppress this past as much as we can. And there's also a difference against racism towards recognized minorities for hundreds of years and towards those who are relatively new and not have been here for like 15 years, such as me. Because people who grow up in a different environment or like many cultures, we have to face racism as microaggressions every single day. And the perfect example for this would be, din svenska är jättebra för en invandrare. And I still don't know what that's supposed to mean, but I still hear it every day. Well, hopefully the person saying that always has a good intention. But one paper cut does not hurt, but if you have so many paper cuts, that's very different. And it's the exact same with microaggressions. At the moment, you don't think of them seriously. But as time passes on, you can't help but think back and notice the damage it has done to your identity. And in those situations, it's also very hard to explain how something is racist because there's always a chance that the other person just doesn't like you or that they're just being nice in their own way. But over time, the pattern becomes very obvious, even though I don't like it. And there's nothing wrong with noticing differences either because that's the human nature. We judge people all the time, whether we like it or not. If there's a room with 9 adults and the 10th person is a child, all of the adults are going to ask, why is the kid here? And if it's different ethnicities, the same question would arise, not because every single one of them are racists, but because their brain noticed something that was different, whether it might be race, age, or gender. So next time, before you ask someone anything about something you notice with them, please reflect upon if you genuinely want to know something, or if you want to tell them something that they actually just didn't even ask for in the first place. But most importantly, reflect upon your behavior. Why is that you might not talk to some people in your class just because they look different than you? You meet them every day, and yet you haven't even had a proper conversation with them. Because this is going to sound very cliche, but we live in 2022, and there is diversity all around us. So the only thing we have to do is to accept the individuality and respect everyone for who they are, because in the future, this diversity is always going to grow. Whether it's sexual identity or gender or ethnicity, it's not going to stop. So the only thing we should do is not let the differences make way for prejudice and discrimination in our society. Thank you, guys.